And good afternoon from Harrisburg University in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining this session of Conversations in Innovation. And I want to give a special shout out to our listeners from other time zones who either got up too early or staying late, like West Coast, South America, and Asia. So as Jamal said, I'm J. Mohan. I'm the director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Harrisburg University. The purpose of these conversations is to bring together leaders of various fields to share their wisdom and insights about innovation. And given the times we live in and the CIA's focus on supporting minorities and women in entrepreneurship and innovation, we want to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So without much ado, let me welcome our impressive panel. Marcus Colston, Super Bowl winner, startup investor and teacher. Mark Blakeman, president of AT&T Mid-Atlantic States. Karan Brown, VP of Creative Brand Experience at Warner Media. So welcome to all of you. And thanks for being here. So let me start with, I like to start with a little bit about your backgrounds and your journey. So ladies first, Karan Brown, let me start with you. Tell us a little bit about your current role and what was that journey like?
Yes, so I am currently the VP of Brand Experience Creative at Warner Media. And wow, quite a journey. So many lessons that I had to learn along the way on my journey. And I think one of the biggest lessons I was just telling someone about yesterday was early on, we're taught be the best that you can be so you can cast a wide net. So that from a career perspective, you're attractive to so many different employers. And so being the good student that I said, I'm just going to cast a really wide net. It took me years, if not decades, to realize something is only a good opportunity if it's a good opportunity for me. What you don't want to do is climb that career ladder, get high enough where you can peek over the wall, only to realize that you've had your ladder up against the wrong wall the entire time. So to get where I am today, it took me quite a while to realize that I needed to actually narrow the aperture and be really good at what I wanted to be really good at. So early on, realizing what your superpowers are and doubling down on those would be my words of wisdom out of the gate.
Well, that's an impressive start, Karan. Thanks again. So Mark, let's come to you. I mean, you are leading a really major organization and you have responsibilities across multiple states. So what was your journey like? Where did it start? What was your career path? You're on mute, Mark.
Thank you. Much like Karan's experience, I too taught work hard, cast a wide net, and you'll find you'll eventually find what you want. And it really the skill in all of that is really what do I want, and asking that question. And I knew from a very young age I wanted to be president of the United States. I mean, that was what I wanted to be. If you go back and talk to somebody that knew me when I was 5, that's what I would have told them. You couldn't pay me enough to be president of the United States now, but that was what I wanted. But it was interesting because everything that I did in life was kind of like, what do I need to do to get to that point? And then realizing that sometimes you have a destination in mind, and you can still be on the same road, but there are different destinations that you can go to, or you may want to stop somewhere else. And I think that's really what I found in my career was I really liked being on the other side of developing public policy and working in that realm, more than being executor of that, but being the person that helped shape that. And so my role at AT&T is really one of public policy and the public facing element of AT&T. When it comes to legislative affairs, regulatory affairs, our corporate philanthropy, basically anything that's externally facing, how is our brand reflected in public policy, in the rules and regulations of our government, in the communities that we live, work, and play in. And those are really the main element of what I do now, and what I love. I literally wake up every morning and I don't go to work. I'm doing something that I really like, because it's always been on that path of where I wanted to go. But to Karan's point, really finding out where it is that I wanted to go was the exciting part of that journey, and that it took a different turn. And yet, I guess you could say I'm president, and I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm just not president of the United States. I'm president of AT&T. So I guess that's how I ended up where I'm at today.
Very cool. So, it's funny, you talk about president, right? I mean, at least the title is, is still president, and you're in Washington, D.C.
Right.
In some ways. So I think, at least from my perspective, the three of us, you, Karan, me, we all, there is some part of a discovery of how we ended up where, and, finding out. But, coming to Marcus, I would think, this is something, it's to get where you are, to be a Super Bowl winner. I think you have to plan it very early, and there is a disciplined, decisive path. Was that how it happened to you? And what was your journey like?
Yeah, I mean, my journey to get to where I'm at today is really rooted in this belief system that I call irrational confidence. And what that means is, just kind of looking at my starting point. I was a high school player that wasn't really highly recruited. Had one scholarship offer to go play college football. Played pretty well. Was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to get drafted. I was the fourth to last pick in the NFL draft my year. And when you look at the odds at each one of those stops, the odds were definitely not in my favor. They were stacked against me. And just through this ability to always set ambitious goals, this ability to continue to master, how I showed up, on the football field, the way that I was able to continue to improve and really focus on self-mastery, was what allowed me and really unlocked an opportunity for me to go on and play at a really high level for 10 years in a place that conventional wisdom told me I had no place being. And, in doing that for 10 years, what I did when I ultimately left the game of football was what I thought I was supposed to do. You see guys retire and they get into venture capital and they get into private equity. And similar to Karan and Mark, kind of reached this point, this inflection point where, I'm really starting in the business world at 32 years old. In a lot of ways, I'm competing against people that have been there and kind of have built the pedigree to be there. So I had to really reach back into those same roots, that same irrational confidence that allowed me and enabled me to achieve at a really high level against incredible odds, and figure out how can I bring that to bear in the business world. And that's what kind of got me started down the road of entrepreneurship. Seeing those parallels between where I started my football journey and where an entrepreneur starts their startup journey, I was able to start to connect those dots and really, see a lot of comparisons. And from there, it kind of set a new trajectory for me to go out and really, again, focus on those same things, focus on setting ambitious goals, focus on, continuing to master myself and my skills and skill development. And that's kind of what has led me down this path to where I've been able to be successful in venture capital. I've been able to be successful in entrepreneurship, and be able to pivot and shift into this education and personal development lane that I'm in now.
So that kind of segues into Karan. One of the follow-up questions is your role, right? VP of Brand Media. What does that mean? And has that changed? Because when I think about branding media, you need to be out there, you need to be talking to people, creating. And now with the COVID, it kind of, everybody's in their own little, cameras other than that. So how did it change the role? And
Before I
Good.
even get started, I just have to say that irrational confidence might be the best thing I have heard all year. I want to make a t-shirt with that. That'll be my mantra. I am going to practice it later this afternoon. Thank you so much for blessing us with that good word of wisdom. And Jay, to answer your question, I think the onset of COVID has actually developed this greater need for there to be an experience of one another, a connection with one another. There was so much loneliness that I think was perpetuating mental illness through all of this, that we started to say, I want to be more intentional about the people I bring into my life. I want to be more intentional about the brands that I engage with. Right. So back in the 80s, there was this one-way push marketing where you'd go to an advertising agency, come up with your slogan, and that's what you're pushing out there. Now, I think social media was like the great equalizer, where now there's this two-way communication. I mean, you can be a 12-year-old sitting in the middle of Peoria, Illinois, and you can send out a tweet that brings down like a huge brand. So no longer can brands just push their messaging onto people. They have to understand the landscape, understand the conversation that's going on, and find an authentic place to join that conversation and to add value. So as the VP of Brand Experience, is both an internal and external role. So internally, we're coming up with the comms, the creative of how we talk to the 30,000 plus Warner Media employees and connect with them as our audience. But then also externally, if we're going to Cannes or Sundance or South by Southwest, how do we bring all of the exciting Warner Media brands under, and some shout out to Mark and AT&T, sometimes in concert with AT&T, how do we show up in those locations with our brands telling one cohesive story? And how does that story work for the benefit of our end user and our audience? Because it's not about you. Anytime you get in the business of pushing your agenda and your message on others, it's going to be a lonely road. But the minute you are in service, it's going to come back to you tenfold. So whether it is a person and their own personal brand or a corporation and that brand, it's really about forming connections.
So follow up, since you mentioned about the brand, the outreach, Mark, AT&T has multiple brands under its larger umbrella. And as an outward-facing public policy head, how do you prioritize, and how did the whole world change for you during the COVID, and how do you prioritize through these, the limited resources of not being able to get out there to these events?
I mean, in many ways, the pandemic kind of heightened our brand. AT&T is all about connecting people, and we didn't need connections ever as much as we needed them in the last 18 months. So providing people with that digital connection when that was the only connection that was available to a lot of people. So in many ways, it allowed us to show off our brand and the power of our network that is making these connections across the globe. I think the other thing, and maybe can help direct us to some of our diversity conversation today too, but we're all sitting in our homes, and then the murder of George Floyd happened. And one of the things that our company, in the public policy space, that I was really proud of our company from taking a stance on is, you wouldn't think that AT&T would get involved with police reform. That's not something that's in our bailiwick, so to speak. But our CEO at the time was like, you know what, we may not be, experts on policing. But we're in every community in this country where we provide cellular service, we provide HBO Max, whatever it may be, DirecTV that we've got that's reaching into people's homes. And we have, in my department, one of the largest lobbying organizations in the country, of any corporation in the country. And how can we use the power of that lobbying and that public policy front to help change the dialogue around police reform? So as people were sitting at homes and watching, again, another one of our brands, CNN, and getting their information that they were taking in, and wanting action, how could we as a company help change the mindset of America around some of these social issues and some of these problems that were plaguing our country and have been plaguing our country for decades. So the pandemic kind of brought a lot of things into focus for us, you know, and I think a lot of companies were seeing this as well. It really, just like we're doing in our personal lives, how do we prioritize what's important to us as individuals? How do we prioritize what's important to our customers, to our employees, and to our brand? And how do we let America and let the world know that this is what AT&T stands for? And so that was really an exciting part of the last 18 months, is getting to work on some of those issues, all at the same time while trying to connect the world in a time when they needed us now more than ever.
So, Marcus, coming back to, you know, you mentioned a little bit about the startup and the investment. So that's one of our, you know, big areas of focus. And we also talk about more diversity and inclusion in the startup world, creating more entrepreneurs that doesn't look like, you know, the normal pipeline of founders. So how did you start with this whole investment or startup? How did you get into that whole space? And one other question: these days you keep hearing about athletes playing. You know, you take Tom Brady or, you know, any of them, you know, playing up to 50 years old and all of that. So how did you decide to step back? And, you know, what was that decision also?
For sure. So to answer your first question, like I mentioned in the intro, I had always had a passion in just learning. And, you know, at the time as an athlete, you know, the thing to do was to get involved in angel investing and venture capital. And, you know, kind of in going along with the trend lines, that was the place where I saw myself. You know, so I you know, invested into a couple of companies. And just my nature is I'm somebody that I like to roll my sleeves up and I like to get my hands dirty. You know, so the portfolio approach never really appealed to me. I was always someone that wanted to invest in a company and then also invest my time and see if I can see what insights or what access I could provide to help drive the companies forward. And in doing that for 8 to 10 years, I kind of started to see a trend form, and it was one that you know, companies wanted pieces of me. And what I mean by that is they wanted the check, they wanted access to the network. But more often than not, companies weren't really interested in, you know, really anything else from me. And as I moved further and got deeper into the venture capital space, I would walk into rooms and I would kind of, I'd be the only person that looked like me a lot of the times. And what comes along with that is this feeling like I'm just kind of a mascot. And as we got into COVID, and I think Karan mentioned it earlier, this intentionality, it made me think about things a lot differently. You know, as I'm homeschooling my kids and time becomes a premium, you know, you start to kind of trim the fat in your life and in your personal and your professional life. And as I started to evaluate where I was spending my time, I started to really see this trend in that I was showing up in a lot of places where I was fully engaged, but the people that I was trying to engage with only wanted a fraction of who I was. And, you know, at that point in time, it kind of led for me to really take a step back and zoom out. And it changed my entire business trajectory, because I realized that as one individual that's experiencing this from the sports angle, there are a lot of other individuals that are going to work on a daily basis and dealing with the same thing from a lot of different angles. They're showing up to places that don't really value who they are as individuals, don't really value their lived experiences, don't really value the contextual experience, the cultural context. And, you know, as I started to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, I realized that this was an area that I really wanted to be intentional about spending my time and spending my energy in trying to help other individuals kind of figure out how they can lead more intentional professional lives. And that's kind of what led me into again into the work that I'm doing now, that is kind of spearheaded at from the educational standpoint, but really helping other individuals really take back ownership of their professional journey, and help them really define and chase down the success that really fits them and fits their lives. So that's kind of a long-winded way to answer your first question. Your second question on how I knew it was time to step away. I had always played by my own standards. Again, when you come into the league the way that I did, with really no expectations, I was never going to depend on someone else to set my expectations for me. So my standard of play, once I got to a place where I couldn't live up to my own standard, I knew it was time for me to step away and do something else, because I had seen guys that they hung on a little bit too long because they didn't know what else to do. And fortunately, I was lucky enough to have some advisors that helped me, kind of build a foundation to transition out of the game as I was still playing. So I didn't feel that need and that urgency to stay on the field when I couldn't live up to my own standard of play anymore.
Hmm. So I want to read out a quote and then come to you, Karan. It's the CEO of Google. He said, "A diverse mix of voices leads to better discussions, decisions, and outcomes for everyone." Right. And so this is one of those whole conversation around diversity and inclusion that has been going around. And as somebody who is in a senior position in an organization that has a lot of public profile, what's your perspective on this whole conversations of diversity and inclusion, and what can you do to empower others in this journey and in this conversation?
I'm so excited about this question. I almost feel like it should have gone to Marcus, but I'm excited to answer it because I also used to be an athlete. I don't have a Super Bowl ring, but I did run track at the Division I level, and I so liken this to sports. Anytime you're building an all-star team, you cannot bring in the same position. If you have all the players on the field trying to play the same position, I can guarantee you 100% of the time you are going to lose. As a leader, you need to cast it correctly so that you are covering the field. And if you have subject matter experts in each place on the field or the court or whatever analogy in the boardroom, whatever analogy you want to use, you now have a team that can work together and see, have coverage and see everything coming your way. Because there is no one, we all think we're super smart, we're super talented, super intelligent, but there's no one person that can do it all themselves. So it's true. They say if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. So if you want longevity, if you want to make really big strides and go far, you have to have the right team covering the entire field. And sorry, I forgot the second part of that question. But that is my question for diversity. Diversity,
right.
Race, ethnicity, gender, thought, diversity of any and everything you can think of. Because if you are a true leader, it's fair to lose in battle, but it is not fair to send your team out there without a plan. And the people that report to me, I never get on someone if something didn't go quite as planned, but I just say, tell me your thought behind it. Tell me why you made that decision. And as long as they can talk through everything, the vetting process of what they went through to arrive at that decision, it's fair. But let's at least give ourselves the best start by casting the right people and diverse people in roles so that we have coverage.
Yeah, so I have quite a few follow-up questions, but we'll come back, to that. So, Mark, talking again about your role and AT&T, right? I mean, it is when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and you think about the Fortune 100 companies, there's a lot of spotlight on them, what they're doing, every move, every announcement, all of that. So, and you kind of touched on the whole social justice movement that was happening, and the relevance of that and all of that. So, was AT&T always conscious about diversity and inclusion? And if not, what did this whole moment trigger? And what have you seen as a leader in the change or the shift in that?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I think one of the things I've always been proud about with AT&T is that our workforce has generally throughout, and this is not a recent thing, but since our inception, our workforce has really mirrored the country. So if 20% of the United States is African American, 20% of our boardroom was African American, 20% of our frontline employees were African American, and that's been pretty true of our company throughout its entire history. I think what's happened with our company was an aha moment for AT&T, as other companies who maybe didn't have as good of a track record were looking out and saying, "Oh, we're not doing very well in that." The first thing they went was, let's go find us an executive somewhere who can help us with meeting these diversity numbers, and doing it for all the wrong reasons. But what happened is we got poached a lot. A lot of our key employees of color, or women employees, started getting other offers from other companies. And I think what was awakening to our company was we need to make sure our bench is deep. To use another sports analogy, but we need to make sure that we, it's not good enough just to have the numbers there and to reflect the society, but we need to make sure that we are training the next generation of people and doing it in a way that they're ready to step in the moment we need them. And I think when we started to lose a lot of our key executives who were people of color or women, as with the Me Too movement and other things, as people were getting heightened awareness around those issues, it really helped us understand we need to do a better job of building our bench. The second thing I would say about diversity, we've had employee resource groups. We've had a fairly good track record around our employee relationships on diverse issues, but it was always about, let's gather all the Hispanic employees, or let's gather all the women, or gather all the gay employees, and they go sit off in a corner and they talk about issues together. And that's not diversity, inclusion, or equity. It was a good step, to allow, giving them an opportunity to have a voice. But as one of a woman who I sit on a board with, who is African American, as we on a nonprofit board I sit with, who's also dealing with some of these issues, she's like, this isn't a Black person's problem. And that's why you may be looking at me saying, why is the white guy working on the diversity, equity, and inclusion work at AT&T's external affairs division? And it's partially because if we're going to change the mindset of our company around some of these issues, we need to make sure that's happening at all levels, and particularly with the older white males like me in this organization. And how do we make them part of the solution, as a part of just doing lip service to diversity? But really, how do we change the policies and the structures and the institutionalized things? There's so many things that we as a company do because we've always done it that way. But if you start to look at why we do it that way, and the impacts that the way that we do things have on people of different gender or different races, you start to realize that we may be doing harm in some cases, and we need to really peel back the onion and really look at how we can change some of our inner workings of our policies to be more diverse, to be more inclusive, and to be more equitable. And so those are just some of the things that have come in this moment with a company as large as ours that, on its surface, you may say has a pretty good track record. But when we start to look deeper into it, we have a lot of room for improvement.
So kind of connecting, because you touched on the structural piece, right? So Marcus, my background is all startups, and that's kind of, stumbled into a little bit of the academic world, but mostly what I know is starting a company, scaling a company, raising, fundraising, all of that. So when we look at, and since you have spent some time in the whole investment space, the whole structural problem of not getting an investment in an idea that is started by a Black founder, a woman founder, whose whose solutions and the problems they're looking at are probably not the next Facebook or next social media, but they are, very much rooted in problems that needs to be solved, right? But they don't get. So I always say this about the startup ecosystem: if you're standing outside looking in, you're always standing outside looking in. So how can somebody like you create an environment where more of these founders, the non-typical founders, can be found and get investment and get those opportunities?
I think that's a really interesting question, and it's one that when you talk about the startup ecosystem, more often than not, the conversation begins and ends with on the founder side of the spectrum, right? There are a lot of conversations around founders of color, and finding diverse founders. But the catalyst for the entire ecosystem is really on the other end of the spectrum, which is where the funding is coming from. And when you don't have a diverse population on that end of the spectrum, what you start to run into is there's just this contextual disconnect. When you're dealing with founders of color that are building products and building solutions that could potentially represent communities of color. To me, I think part of the movement that has started with a lot of athletes and entertainers entering into venture capital, I think that helps to even the playing field a little bit, because at the end of the day, innovation is really a function of your perspective, right? So as a founder who has a contextual experience, who has a particular perspective, if you can find investors and supporters that share that perspective, it's going to increase your odds and increase your chances of finding that right fit, because it's not all black and white. It's not all data driven. There's a feel that you get when you invest in a company. There's a feel that you get from that team and that founder, right? And the more that you can marry up the contextual experiences between founders and investors, I think the more you can create that connection, that it factor, or those intangible factors that oftentimes lead to an investor really getting behind a founder and getting behind an idea. And the more that you can have this representation throughout every space in the ecosystem, the more that starts to kind of level the playing field.
So Karan, following, so I have this whole theory of, I have so many crazy theories, right? Having gone through this whole journey of trying to start companies and all of that. So one of the things that I always talk about is that a startup needs three kind of personalities: a hacker, a hustler, and a hipster. Is how I define it, right? The hacker is somebody who's good on the technology side, and you find more startup founders, including me, came from the technology background side. But you quickly figure out that you need these other two. A hipster is kind of somebody who understands the customers, is somebody like you, understands the media space, the branding piece. And then a hustler is somebody who can close a deal, right? Who's a sales guy who can, so you need all three. And it usually, one person is never that, from a personality perspective, is never that. So trying to find those kind of co-founders is really how startups are built. So when you look at a company like yours, like Warner Media, which at least, for people like us who are on the outside, doesn't know much about the media space, we think everybody is a creative people in there, right? Everybody is like, this cool, creative people. And so how do you bring together that, the other, so it's a kind of a different question, because usually I would think, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that it's more, you need to bring more women in, more, blacks in, and all of that. But when I think about the media and all of that, how does a nerd or a technology guy fit into that world? And how do you create an environment which is, which has all these personalities and their roles? And how does, basically, I think I'm looking at how you look at, your organization.
Absolutely. And it's so true. The minute you tell someone that you work at Warner Media or HBO Max, they're like, oh, I have a cousin that acts, and can you put them in? And they all think that we are the filmmakers. But there is a business side to entertainment. So the creatives and the talent definitely is one big, huge portion of that. But when you're talking about really those, 27,000 plus employees at Warner Media, they are really honed in on the business side of it. So I don't know, you said the hipster, the hustler, and the, the hacker, taking care of all of that so that we can build the foundation so that these stories, these diverse stories, can come to life and be told. And I want to take that even to a personal level, because when you said that, I was like, oh, this is a wonderful philosophy, right? And I don't even know if I'd stop at those three, because I keep a 7-person personal board of directors at all times. So I think, especially as a founder, as a small business startup founder, people need to make sure that they are not going it alone. They need to have their personal board of directors and advisors at all times. And hopefully those people have different skill set. You got some hustlers in there, some hipsters, some hackers, and whatever else you need to round out, what it is that maybe you're not bringing. You're going to be brilliant at what you're bringing to the table, but then round it out with a really strong board of directors. I believe in mentorship. And I believe that you have to see what you want to be, and then you have to be what you want to see. Right? So you need to go create that advisory board full of people that are going to give you access to those rooms or those other people that maybe you can't get to right now, those rooms you can't get into. And then you have to pay it forward. You have to be that for someone else. And then you will start to see it come back tenfold for you. And especially as a woman and a woman of color, going blindly into different scenarios, pitch competitions, or trying to, we talk about the dismal numbers of venture capital that women get. You look at Black women and it is absolutely dismal. So as a Black woman, and I'm part of a group called Pipeline Angels, where we are aggregating the money of, women who do have a little discretionary income so that we can identify with founders that are bringing products for curly hair. And we say, oh, okay, I see you. I see why that's so necessary, where there could be other rooms and they're like, who cares? Just go buy whatever at Target. No, you have to get in rooms with people who see you and understand. So networking and mentorship and building your advisory board is so key. And especially for the women out there, especially for the people of color out there, but for everyone, you need to have an advisory board and a strong network.
So that's a great. This conversation is so flowing in, right? I mean, I'm thinking about the next question or the next panel, and you kind of end up there. So, Mark, coming to the whole advisors, the mentors. I'm always curious about the big companies. Do you have because I know of Google and Amazon having venture capital in-house that, their own little ventures and, funding and all of that. Does AT&T do anything like that? Does AT&T do you sit on boards of investment outside? Do you look at, how does that whole innovation piece work? And what can you do in that whole diversity and inclusion? And do you also opportunities to partner with, universities and academy and all of that? So give us some of the things that happens within AT&T.
Yeah, we've had various iterations of this, as time goes by. I mean, the most recent was we had what were called the AT&T foundries, and each foundry was developed in a different geography and usually had an academic partner as well as another for-profit entity that was there. And it was allowing, so for instance, we had one in Palo Alto that worked on basically app development. And how do we give access to our network to app developers so they can in real time understand if they're trying to come up with the next best app, how is it going to actually work on a live network, and giving them access to that network. But part of the interesting part of the foundry was also that every month we had pitch sessions where we would invite all the people that were coming in and using our network to work on their projects would have an opportunity to come in, almost like speed dating, and come in and give their 5-minute pitch. And then we would have representatives from different venture capital firms. Our own firm were there, and we would actually buy into ideas on the spot at the foundry. And we had them around app development, about healthcare applications, about self-driving cars. We had different foundries all over the United States that were really working on that. And again, partnering with universities, venture capital firms, and other technology companies that could help us in those specific spaces. I think we also have a very robust mentorship and internship program at AT&T, where we go and recruit at the best universities across the country. One thing that always irritates me when people talk about creating diverse workforces, somebody will say, well, there just aren't enough Black developers, or there aren't enough Hispanic finance people. And all that tells me is that you didn't do a good enough job or you don't have a good enough HR department that knows where to go find those people, because there are people in every demographic, excellent people. You just have to know where to go out and find them. So we have great partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, where we do a lot of recruiting. Same with the Native American colleges and Hispanic institutions as well. And building up that pipeline of talent and innovation too. So I think going out and making sure that you're inclusive on those foundries as well, and open to everyone, was really a key component of our AT&T foundries. Did I answer the question?
Yeah. So it kind of follows up. So Marcus, have you found because you talked about the investment side, having to look the right group to get the founders who are Black or Hispanic, or to get that investment. Have you found partners in bigger organizations who has those kind of fund that is focused on getting a diverse group of startups? And if so, what are some of the organizations or programs that you found really interesting and attractive?
Yeah, I think in the last handful of years, maybe the last 5 or 6 years, you've seen some of the larger VCs spin off, minority focused arms or minority focused funds. So I think you'll continue to see those types of initiatives. A lot of my work at this point is really around helping entrepreneurs, helping really aspiring entrepreneurs, and helping professionals that are kind of teetering on whether or not to make that jump from corporate into entrepreneurship. Really being intentional about what it is that their next move is going to be. So I don't really. I mentioned a little earlier. I'm not really in that venture space as my roots aren't as deep as they once were. Just because a lot of my work now is focused on helping people that are really, like I said, aspiring entrepreneurs, small business owners, or those that are kind of ready to make that decision, ready to make that jump. Really be intentional and really be introspective about what that next move is going to be. Because as you all know, like entrepreneurship it's a game of risk. And if you have a corporate career, professional career, making that jump there's a lot of risk associated with that, not just financial risk. So really helping individuals kind of map out what that process could look like. Map out what business opportunities, map out what their intent and what their focus is ultimately going to be within that small business. That's kind of where I spend a lot of my time. And with the hope that as these small business owners and entrepreneurs bring products and bring services to bear, the investors and the supporters will continue to be there and be able to fund and ultimately support and scale these small businesses.
So that Karun, so that brings me the question of innovation, right? I mean, so we talk about this whole diversity and inclusion, and talk about startups and the founders, and it's all about solving a problem or coming up with a unique idea, and that's what innovation is all about. So, what have you seen? Because we're like I said, the time just flies, and we're already at 12:47. So I want to get to this. Two questions really. One is around the innovation. So what have you seen within your organization and outside that was really unique, innovative, that you would think that this wouldn't have happened if the COVID was not there? Because one of them is, of course, that we are all on camera all the time, which is really really something that I don't think most people thought would happen. But beyond that, what are some of the innovations that you have seen in your organization or outside?
Within the organization, I've been pleasantly surprised with the collaboration tools that I've seen. We've had to find, new ways to make it feel like we're all in one room and able to whiteboard together. So there have been a number of things in that space. But one thing that I would really love to highlight right now in this outside in the real world is a company called Goal Setter, who actually has a Black woman founder. And Goal Setter has been a hack in my household that has really allowed my children, I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, to understand money and finances. Before, old school way of giving allowance, you're giving them a couple bucks every week. And it's nowadays, and especially with COVID, when you couldn't go anywhere, they never had an opportunity to spend this money. So in a weird way, the little money they had in their piggy bank meant nothing to them. When Goal Setter came along, children actually get this little like debit card type of thing where their allowance goes straight to it. They have to answer weekly financial quizzes that are done in such fun ways. And I could not believe how much my kids look forward to answering these quizzes, to learning, and to then being able to use their debit card out in this digital world that we now live in. And so being able to buy something on Amazon is the equivalent of us back in the day walking to the corner store. So it wasn't until we made that digital leap did a piggy bank or allowance mean anything to them. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, you actually raise a really great point about that, because when you think about innovation, it's everybody's stuck at home. So you just, while I was starting the question around the whole business, this is a really, great other area that, pretty much the kids are stuck at home, the whole education space, everything is kind of going through this radical change and shift. So it's a really interesting way to look at it, which, Mark, which brings to you the same question, like, what's a unique innovation or one or two that has happened within AT&T that wouldn't have happened, if this whole uncertainty hadn't happened? And what have you seen outside also that kind of, had an impact within the way you do business or run your personal life?
Sure. I think internally, and some of these things were maybe in the works or things that we had been thinking about that all of a sudden overnight became, we have to do this now. For instance, just as you can imagine, we're a company that has a lot of call centers where hundreds of people gather in one location and take telephone calls from our customers. And how do we all of a sudden have to move all of that to people's homes? And how do you protect people's information, personal information? How do you give all of the systems that they might have in a big data center or in a big call center, and then give them that same access sitting at home, at their regular phone, at their desk in their office, doing the same type of work. So shifting that functionality almost overnight was something that was in the works of, we were playing around with the idea of how can we give people more flexibility around that job, but then all of a sudden we had to do that. Similarly, we have a product at AT&T where we have a contract from the federal government called Firstnet, where we provide communication services to first responders. It was part of what came out of the 9/11 Commission. But one of the key things from that was the same thing with 911 operators. how do we allow 911 operators who can't necessarily go into a work location to be able to take those same phone calls when literally, yeah, you may want to be able to pay your bill over the phone, and that's important. But if it's a life or death situation, you need to make sure that that person sitting at home has all of the technology and capability to do that. And so a lot of really cool innovations around the 911 space that allowed 911 operators to work in remote locations as well. And I think a thing that's helped that innovation is the whole thing around edge computing. And I don't know how much people know about edge computing, but if you think about how much stuff is in the cloud today and being stored in data centers all over the country, how can we move that cloud closer to that person's computer at home? And so the amount of time that it takes, and again, we're talking about fractions of milliseconds here, but in things like 911 calls and things like gaming and online betting, if you're into that, those things are really important that they happen really quickly. And how can we get that cloud closer to the customer's home so that the latency between the time they hit send on their computer to the time it gets back is something that there's a lot of innovation going around in that space and our own network and creating that and allowing a lot of new things to pop up because we can take care of some of that latency issues by bringing the cloud closer to people's homes. So those are just a couple of things that come top of mind.
Marcus, pretty much the same question, the innovation that you have seen either within your work area or personal, right? Because you mentioned about the kids homeschooling and all of that. And I certainly don't want to let you go without, your prediction for the season, both, how the Saints are going to do and, overall, what does the season look like? Who are your top picks? And I know you said nobody should bet on that, and I'm letting the audience know, but again, hey, we've got an expert, an NFL player, Super Bowl winner, so I can't let you go without asking that question too.
Yeah, so I'll start with the last point first. Please, nobody wager off of anything I have to say. No, I think Tampa Bay still look like the team to beat. I think New Orleans will have a good season. This is probably not the best time after that loss they just took over the weekend to answer this question. But I think Tampa Bay is still the team to beat.
What about Chiefs?
I think they'll be in it. They'll be in it. I mean, that quarterback, he is who he is. I mean, he's the face of the league at this point. So they'll be in it. I wouldn't be surprised to see a rematch in the Super Bowl. In terms of your question around innovation, I'll take it a slightly different direction. I'll take it away from the technical aspects. I think something that I've seen, just in general, and it's something that has really been at the forefront of my business, has been this heightened self-awareness, this heightened intention. With the events of the last 18 months to 2 years with COVID, intersecting with this more mainstream nature of the challenges and the systemic challenges with social and racial injustice. I think as people are sitting at home, watching the things that unfolded in our country, it made it really difficult to bury your head in the sand and not deal with it, not think about it. So I think in a lot of ways, it has brought intention back to the forefront for a lot of folks. And I think you're seeing people operate with some time urgency and some urgency around, the things that they care about and the things that are their core values and the things that they're no longer willing to let them be negotiable. And I think that's showing itself in entrepreneurship. I think it's showing itself in small business, the way that small businesses are being supported. Like I said, it's been something that it literally changed the entire complexion of my business. And I think it's something that hopefully it's around to stay. Because I feel like as an entrepreneur, if you're able to to really have clarity in your vision and have conviction behind your vision, there's a tribe of people that will be willing to support and consume your product and services. So that is the one innovation that I've seen in the last 18 months. It's really the innovation of individual people becoming more intentional about the way that they live their lives, the businesses and the services that they want to create, and the communities that they want to serve.
So we are almost at the end of the time. So first, I want to thank all of you, Marcus, Karan, Mark, for the time. From my perspective, this is where we at Harrisburg University connect with this incredible leaders like you guys the first time, have a conversation. So for us, this is the beginning of a journey. So we hope to, have you guys as mentors, supporters, however you guys can, engage with a lot of the startups and the programs that we run on a regular basis. So, I look forward to connecting with you after this. So with that, we'll again start with Karan. Any last words, like advice to just the other leaders who are listening in, going through these, because we all have been going through uncertain times, and that's always challenging. So any last words of advice, and also anything to our listeners that includes a lot from Harrisburg area and Harrisburg University.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. My last word of advice would be network, and build that community. And when you reach out, don't just ask the person for something. You can provide value to them when you are reaching out. You can make a connection. I don't know if you went to the same college or if you all like the same, just find some connection point. Also do your research, understand what it is they do, and offer up some information or article that you read recently that's really interesting. Someone would be more likely to respond back on LinkedIn. Just build that network through connections.
Well, thank you. Mark, same question.
Yeah, as we're coming out of this pandemic, I think my one advice to people is if we go back to where we were before, we're doing it wrong. And if we have not learned something, if we're not changing something about ourselves personally or about the way we do business, and we approach the world in a completely different way, then we are sincerely doing this wrong. I think we really need to. And don't be afraid of that. I think there's going to be, and we're already seeing it, profound change that's coming in the way we do business, in the way we interact with people, in our mental health. There's a lot of change that's going on to happen, and we need to embrace it and to be there to help support other people who are going through that change at the same time. So be that person to help others along the journey as we're all going through this change together, but embrace that change at the same moment and step into it and lean into it. And I think we can all come out better as a society if we do that.
Well, Marcus, same.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Karan and Mark. I would say as an individual, as a leader, don't allow discomfort to make you a prisoner of your own potential. And what I mean by that is, change is uncomfortable. We've seen a lot of change over the last 18 to 20 months. And as Mark said, I think the way that we have, as a culture, the way that we have been able to come out of the other side continues to drive us forward. And the more that you can embrace that change as not just a moment of discomfort, but an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to improve, an opportunity to evolve, we'll all be better off for it.
Well, thanks again to all of you. I mean, I think that's a great way to end with, talking about that, embracing the change and learning from it. And to Mark's point about, not going back to the way we were doing business. And I think that's something everybody here. And so, I'll read one last comment from the audience. Valuable, insightful discussion session. Thank you all. Fantastic job. Keep up the great work. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think, that's a great way to end the session. Thanks again, all of you.
Thank you.